Where we just left off, Grandma had invited the newspaper reporter to come to her house for Shotgun Cheatham's last day above ground. The reporter backed down the porch steps, staggering under all this new material. "I'm much obliged, ma'am," he said. "Happy to help," Grandma said. Mary Alice had turned loose of my shirt tail. What little we knew about grown-ups didn't seem to cover Grandma. She turned on us. "Now, I gotta change my shoes and walk all the way up to the lumber yard in this heat," she said, as if she hadn't brought it all on herself. Up at the lumber yard, they'd be knocking together Shotgun Cheatham's coffin and sending the bill to the county, and Grandma had to tell them to bring that coffin to her house with Shotgun in it. By nightfall, a green pine coffin stood on two sawhorses in the bay window of the front room. People milled in the yard. They couldn't see Shotgun from there because the coffin lid blocked the view. Besides, a heavy gauze hung from the open lid. Shotgun hadn't been exactly fresh when they discovered his body. Talk to your folks about that. Grandma had flung open every window, but there was a peculiar smell in the room. I'd only had one look at him when they carried in the coffin, and that was enough. I'll tell you just two things about him. He didn't have his teeth in, and he was wearing bib overalls. People in the yard still couldn't believe Grandma was holding an open house. This didn't stop the reporter who was haunting the parlor looking for more flesh to add to his story. And it didn't stop Mrs. L.J. Wiedenbaugh, the banker's wife, who came leading her father, an ancient codger half her size, in full Civil War Union blue. "We're here to pay our respects at this sad time," Mrs. Wiedenbaugh said when Grandma let them in. "When I told Daddy that Shotgun had been decorated by U.S. Grant and wounded 3 times at Bull Run, it brought it all back to him, and we had to come." Her old daddy wore a forage cap and a decoration from the Grand Army of the Republic. He seemed to have no idea where he was. That's how us old codgers are. She led him up to the coffin where they admired the flowers. Grandma had planted a pitcher of glads from her garden. At either end of the pine box in each pitcher she'd stuck an American flag. Glads or gladiolas, tall flowers. A few more people willing to brave Grandma came and went, but finally we were down to the reporter, who'd settled into the best chair, still nosing for news. Then who appeared at the front door but Mrs. Effie Wilcox in a hat. "Mrs. Dowdle, I've come to set with you overnight and see our brave old soldier through his last watch." In those days, people sat with the corpse through the final night before burial. I'd have bet money Grandma wouldn't let Mrs. Wilcox in for a quick look, let alone overnight. But of course, Grandma was putting on the best show possible to pull wool over that reporter's eyes. Little though she seemed to think of townspeople's, she thought even less of strangers. Grandma waved Mrs. Wilcox inside, and in she came. Her eyes were all over the place. Remember, our friend Effie is cross-eyed. She made for the coffin and stared at the black and white gauze and said, "Don't he look natural?" Then she drew up a chair next to the reporter. He flinched because he had it on good authority that she'd just been let out of the insane asylum. Oh, who told that? Grandma. "Warm, ain't it?" she said straight at him, but looking everywhere else. The crowd outside finally dispersed, and Mary Alice and I hung at the edge of the room, too curious to be anywhere else. "If you're here for the long haul," Grandma said to the reporter, "how about a beer?" He looked encouraged, and Grandma left him to Mrs. Wilcox, which was meant as a punishment. She came back with 3 of her home brews, cellar cool. She brewed beer to drink herself, but these 3 bottles were to see the reporter through the night. She wouldn't have expected her worst enemy, Effie Wilcox, to drink alcohol in front of a man. In normal circumstances, the family recalls stories about the departed to pass along the long nights, hours. But these circumstances weren't normal, and quite a bit had already been recalled about Shotgun Cheatham anyway. Only a single lamp burned, and as midnight drew on, the Gladds drooped in their pictures. I was wedged in a corner, beginning to doze. Mary Alice was sound asleep on a throw rug. After the second beer, the reporter lolled. Visions of Shotgun Civil War glories, no doubt, dancing in his head. You could hear the tick of the kitchen clock. Grandma's chin would drop, then jerk back up. Mrs. Wilcox had been humming Rock of Ages, but tapered off after Let Me Hide Myself in Thee. Then there was the quietest sound you ever heard, somewhere between a rustle and a whisper. It brought me around, and I saw Grandma sit forward and cock her head. I blinked to make sure I was awake, and the whole world seemed to listen. Not a leaf trembled outside. Kiddos, I love you dearly. Have a great day. Do something fun. Do something to help your family. Love you. Bye for now.